welcome into our Dog Nation post-game show presented by the UGA bookstore. My name is Brandon Adams. As you can see, I am live at Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia, South Carolina, where the Georgia Bulldogs have just knocked off the South Carolina Gamecocks by a final score of 45-16. I'm happy to be joined in the Classic City tonight by our buddy Mike Griffith. Normally in this spot, it's former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards, but as many of you are aware, in addition to being a great analyst, Terrence is also a terrific football coach, too, and he coaches tonight in the state playoffs, so we wish him well and his Pace Academy Knights team as they move through the playoffs here in the state of Georgia. And happy to have Mike Griffith pinch hitting late here on a Saturday night, and a lot to talk about from Georgia's win against South Carolina this evening. Also, some of the rumor mill stuff around the program prior to the game. We'll cover all of that over the course of the next couple of minutes. But, Mike, let me start with this. You know, for a Georgia team that has found easy wins hard to come by, it seems like even last week against Mississippi State, when Georgia was a sizable favorite, that game went probably down to the wire more so than many UGA fans would have liked. I think it was nice, and I think I'm going to speak on behalf of a lot of fans when I say this. It was nice to see Georgia tonight have an easy win and take what really could have been some lost momentum after jumping out 21-0. South Carolina came roaring back. They scored 10 quick points, and you thought, oh, is this an example of a game in which Georgia was about to put it away and the Gamecocks were going to do something that allowed them to hang around all night long? And ultimately that didn't happen. Georgia extended the lead to 28-10. And really, even though it wasn't a perfect game for Georgia on either side of the ball, there was never a moment where you really felt like South Carolina was a risk of making this one close and putting Georgia in a threatening spot. I thought, for me personally, it was a pretty satisfying win tonight, especially given the fact that it comes in a revenge situation after South Carolina had beaten Georgia a year ago. What were your early thoughts as you kind of processed what happened here at Williams-Brice Stadium just a few moments ago?
Yeah, well, the last guy out of Williams-Brice Stadium turned out the lights. I mean, they've had so many guys quit on each other and quit the team. They lost more defensive linemen. I know that Kirby Smart's going to talk a lot about the run game tonight, but really that was an overmatched, overwhelmed, thinned-out team. And as much satisfaction as he's going to take out of it, BA, my gut reaction is you've got JT Daniels. Don't leave that Ferrari parked in the garage. Georgia ran the ball on the last 15 plays that they ran, all 12 of their offensive plays in the fourth quarter. To me, that's a wasted opportunity to work with Arian Smith, to work with Darnell Washington, to work with these receivers. Kirby tells us all the time how he's looking to make this offense more open. And guys, we want to throw the ball. And then he'll tell us, you can't get reps like you get in a game. So tonight, he gives the third string running back the last 12 carries. And I said, congratulations, you'll have the best third string running back, the most polished third string running back in the league, when I think this was an opportunity for Georgia to work on their pass game. And BA, I can't help but wonder if he didn't want to run it up on his friend. I understand that him and Bobo are friends, but doggone it, Georgia's paying Kirby $6 million a year, and Georgia needs to be scoring in the 50s right now and making statements that this program is going to have a dynamic offense moving forward.
Well, let's talk about this Georgia running game for a moment, because I think my overall feeling on it tonight is a little different than yours. Now, generally speaking, I kind of agree with you that you've got to be explosive in the passing game in games like this so that you can be explosive when it really matters. You can't just flip the switch when you face Alabama or Florida this season or an LSU last season. You can't just decide in those moments, okay, now we're going to throw the football. You've got to have a attack mentality offensively. Right. So for the most part, I at least agree with your general sentiment there. However, the one thing that I think I'm a little different on is I didn't find Georgia's running game tonight hard to watch. I didn't find myself saying, why is UGA running the football? This was not 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Now, when Dejon Edwards comes into the end, maybe it kind of gets away from that a little bit, but you saw explosive runs tonight from Zamir White. You certainly saw explosive runs from James Cook, who averaged nearly 20 yards a carry on the evening. Even Kenny McIntosh got in the mix, and he had his own moments there too. So this was a situation in which Georgia was running the ball so well for explosive runs. I think any coach in that spot is, for the most part, going to operate under a pretty similar game plan. This wasn't the old school keep chopping wood version of Georgia football where it's 3 and 4 yards at a time in the hope that you wear down an opponent over the course of the game. What I saw was Georgia doing, and I'm going to give JT Daniels credit for this, I think the threat of the pass that was established last week against Mississippi State put South Carolina in a tough choice. And this is what you always want to do. You want to put those defenders and defensive coaches in a choice. Do you want to stop the run? Do you want to stop the pass? I think tonight you saw gaping holes for the Georgia running backs to go through. Some of that was due to the fact that South Carolina was missing a lot of bodies, as you mentioned a moment ago. But some of this is also, I think, an example now that you just can't sell out on the run and expect to stop Georgia because of what they were able to show with JT Daniels last week. So I certainly get your point about, hey, you want to work on that passing game so you can make that a full component of your arsenal. But tonight, I was very entertained by the Georgia running game that I saw. And I didn't, to me, this was not the stubborn Kirby that sticks to the run at the expense of everything else. This was a guy who was really finding some explosive plays in that run, which earlier in the season is something that Georgia fans desperately wanted to see more of.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, here's a situation I didn't like, okay? So it's 3rd and 15, and you're at the South Carolina 20-yard line. You're already in field goal range at the South Carolina 20-yard line. Why are you running the football there? Why not take another shot at the end zone? Again, is it Kirby not wanting to run the score up on Bobo? It's 35-10. It's 3rd and 15 at the 20. You're in field goal range. Doesn't matter what you do on the next play. So why not? And Jermaine Burton had just dropped a touchdown pass. So why not give JT Daniels an opportunity? It's because to me, BA, it's a mentality. It's a confidence. It's a swagger that, hey, we got JT Daniels now. And we can stick this ball downfield, and you'd better watch it because Georgia offense now, folks, we're moving, and we're going to be signing recruits because Georgia's going to throw it. It's like it reminded me when Dan Mullen looked at the stats before the Florida game, and they said, what do you think of Georgia's team? And he goes, they're pretty good for what they are. I mean, the running back is their number 3 receiver. That doesn't need to happen. Because if Dan Mullen is saying that in a press conference, he's saying it in living rooms, and that's why Florida's getting all these great receivers, and Georgia's their recruiting class is not where it should be. You've got to this was an opportunity for Georgia to make a statement. Now you could say, Mike, 45-16 is plenty, but you know what? 52-16 sounds even better. And if you're at the 1-yard line, I know you want to go shake Mike's hand and talk about fishing in the summer, but you got kids that have been working year round to score that touchdown that you took away from them when you took a knee at the 1 because you didn't want to hurt your friend's feelings.
A lot of people agree with you in the comment section here. William and Elaine Morgan, they like what you're saying there. Some other folks do there as well. But let's not forget here that you can hang 60 on this South Carolina team if you want to, but this is a team that was playing without Kingsley Barre today, playing without Luke Reichert today, playing without Jordan Birch today, playing without Alex Huntley today. I'm not quite so sure that scoring 60 on this South Carolina team prepares you for much of what else you're going to see in the rest of the SEC. It might have looked good when you go to dognation.com early in a Sunday morning, but as a true preparation for the real battles in the SEC, this wounded opponent here today where you had COVID mixed in with player departures, I'm not quite so sure that really is the proving ground for what really matters in the SEC. And, Mike, it's a real shame, too, because I think you and I have talked about this off the air. For me, I'd love to see just a little bit better team on Georgia's schedule to close out the season with. Maybe that's what Missouri ends up being, assuming Georgia gets a chance to reschedule that and have that game played. Maybe they're a little bit better than this or a little bit better than Vanderbilt next week, or maybe a little bit better than what Mississippi State was supposed to be last week. But you almost wish there was that team that you could go all out against. But this was not a South Carolina team putting up much of a fight tonight. So the 60 that you want to score, the 70 points that some fans want to score, you probably could have done it. I'm just not sure it would have meant very much, just given the fact that South Carolina barely had 11 to play with.
Well, to me, it's a mentality, BA. You're right. It doesn't need much, but then neither does sacks in the fourth quarter, and neither does tackles for losses. If you're going to talk about, Kirby talks about this attacking defensive mentality. Guys, you got to play with a mentality, Well, what's your offense play with that mentality then? Quit being such a conservative coach. If you're going to have your defense go for sacks and tackles for losses in the fourth quarter, I didn't see him play in prevent, BA, because you could say, well, if you only gave up 16 or 23 or 30, it doesn't really matter. But Kirby thinks defense. So he's saying, man, we're going to keep coming on defense. We're going to have an aggressive mentality. You offense? Oh, yeah, we're just going to hand off 12 times in a row. We're not going to let you have an aggressive mentality because we're a defensive team. He doesn't realize it, BA, but I think that's the message that's being sent is Georgia's content to hand the ball off 12 times in the fourth. Do you think Florida is handing the ball off 12 times in the fourth quarter? Is Alabama handing the ball off 12? Is Trevor Lawrence handing the ball off? Listen, Kirby Smart wants to create a mentality at Georgia that he needs to stand behind his words. And he's not standing behind his words when he's handing the ball off 12 times in the fourth quarter instead of scoring another touchdown on his friend.
I guess my point, though, here, Mike, is I thought tonight was a smashing success for UGA. It's been a long time since we've seen Georgia score more than 30 points in back-to-back SEC games. They've now done that. It's been a long time since we've seen Georgia really win an SEC game easily. You had a couple of that early in the season against Arkansas, Auburn, and Tennessee, but really over the course of the last couple of years, SEC wins have been, for the most part, scuffles for Georgia. There haven't been a lot of coasting, comfortable wins where you could play a lot of guys late in the game. So, for me, I don't want to get lost in the minutia of why was it 45-52 or why was it 52-59 when really we saw a Georgia team tonight show evidence that it has turned the corner. I want to talk about these running backs here coming up and get some more of your thoughts on that. Let me remind folks you're watching our Dog Nation postgame show presented by the UGA Bookstore. Happy to have Mike Griffith with us tonight. Of course, I'm live here in Columbia, South Carolina. My name is Brandon Adams. By the way, as you're heading towards the holiday season, don't forget to check out the UGA Bookstore. For all those folks to buy for on your list, they're tough to buy for, generally speaking. But when it comes to good-looking UGA apparel like the Vineyard Vines, the Tommy Bahama, or the only place you can get the UGA 10 line from Peter Millar, my friends at the UGA Bookstore have all of that. If you're in Athens, you can shop there 7 days a week. If you are not in Athens, you can shop online 24 hours a day, 365 days a year online at UGAbookstore.com. Make sure you check them out. It's a great way to get ready for the holiday season. We'll be looking forward to being back at the UGA Bookstore again next Saturday for one final time. So let's talk a little bit more about the three-headed monster we saw at Georgia at running back today. Couple touchdowns for Zamir White, couple touchdowns for James Cook. Some really nice moments, I thought, from Kenny McIntosh. And, Mike, for me, this was an example of an ease of running the football that I don't think that Georgia has if it's not for what they were able to show last week with the passing game. Some of this was also, as we said before, opponent-driven. But I think tonight, for the Georgia fan that's been craving those explosive runs, I think tonight you got a chance to see some of that. And for me, that really is a positive.
Well, yeah, it was good to see those runs. It was good to see James Cook break off long runs and Kenny McIntosh and Zamir White. And I understand that Kirby wanted to get the run game back on track, and it absolutely needed to get back on track. And they had 332 yards, and that's very impressive. That's a good-looking box score. But what's not impressive to me is your quarterback throwing for 139 yards. That looks like a high school. JT Daniels was 10 of 16 for 139 yards. I think Oconee County, that looks like a high school passing line. Look, you got a Ferrari here. It's like you got, some person driving 35 miles with a Ferrari. JT Daniels didn't come here to throw 16 passes for 139 yards. Here's George Pickens, 3 catches for 25 yards. Okay. So why is your third string running back? This is my only point. Why is your third string running back, Dejon Edwards, getting 14 touches and George Pickens is getting 3? Come on, BA. If you're a coach, you've got to understand, you've got to take care of your players. George Pickens didn't come here to catch 3 passes. That was the whole issue with Stetson Bennett. Was what all you could do with Stetson. Now you've got a guy that can throw for 400 or 300, and maybe not tonight because, to your point, the defense was playing it different, but you didn't even throw a pass in the fourth quarter. And so I don't think Kirby gets it. I don't think he understands that equity that he built up with the Georgia fan base went out the window with 571 yards given up to Florida and 564 yards given up to Alabama. And we all decided collectively, including the head coach, that from now on, Georgia's got to have offense to compete. So here we are again, seeing fourth quarter with 12 straight running plays and 139 yards of passing in a game that you yourself, and I agree, say Georgia probably could have thrown for 300 and scored in the 60s.
Yeah, but I don't want to get lost in the fourth quarter of this game because I really think that's garbage time. I think that's meaningless.
It is.
You can't win a national championship on the basis of what you do against this South Carolina team in the fourth quarter. And to go back to a comparison you made a little earlier, if you look at what Florida and Dan Mullen do, there's a reason they do what they do because they've got Damian Pierce and, guys like that at running back. They don't have Zamir White. They don't have James Cook. They don't have Kenny McIntosh. If they did, they'd be using those running backs more. Now, listen, I think you would join me in saying that if you want to look at what's going to keep Florida from winning a national championship, it's the absence of the elite back that's going to chew up 8-9 yards at a clip, the way we saw the Georgia running backs do that tonight. Kirby Smart, when you talk about being a man of his word, he has said he wants to take. Go ahead.
But BA, they didn't do that in those games. They couldn't get those yards against Florida. It isn't DeAndre Swift. It isn't Nick Chubb. They don't have the NFL. Now, Kenny McIntosh showed some vision. I think James Cook showed some speed and some upside. But Zamir White's not that. They aren't winning that way. The whole reason they lost to Florida was, and anybody that watched Kentucky, Florida today, I mean, Florida's got 7 points until they return a punt. And you're thinking, now, how does Kentucky hold Florida to 7 offensive points in the first half and Georgia gives up 38? Well, the answer is really simple. Georgia wasn't able to run the ball, and Florida had 9 offensive possessions because they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't take chunks out of it like Kentucky did. So, to me, this is an opportunity now, and you're right, because the fourth quarter is quote-unquote garbage time, and you can kind of name your score, this is where Kirby reveals who he really is. You can do anything you want, Coach. You choose to hand it off. To me, that tells me that Kirby, for all the talk about changing the offense and being more aggressive, is still Kirby. And to me, it's not garbage time. I think Georgia needs to make a statement. There's people out there, BA, that said Georgia didn't belong in the top 10. I mean, I can't believe people are questioning the validity of Georgia as a top 10 team, but they are. So 45-16, you look at it and you go, yeah, they were pretty impressive. But as you said yourself, it wasn't. Now, do I feel better about the run game? Sure. You beat up on South Carolina, right? Is anybody out there really going to go, wow, look at that Georgia run game's back? I just don't think it makes.
Come on, that's not a fair argument. But that's not a fair argument to make, though. If you're going to say that no one's going to give them credit for that because of South Carolina, the same thing is true on the other side as well. Had Georgia scored 45 points by throwing touchdowns, people are going to say it's also opponent dependent as well. You see this on Twitter, people knocking South Carolina for having, the absence of a head coach and everything like that. So you can't use that argument to not what Georgia did, because people would have said the same thing on the other side as well. And I do think it's a little bit interesting that, it seems like the basic gist of this conversation, now you weren't with us in the post-game show last week, but the basic gist of this conversation is more negative than last week's post-game conversation was, even though Georgia tonight played a much more thorough, much better game in all phases. Yes, last week Georgia threw 4 touchdown passes, but had no running game and really no defense. Tonight was a much better game on the whole. It was a much better game in totality. And, frankly, I think the post-game conversation ought to reflect that this was a good night for Georgia. And doing this on the heels of finding a little bit of a throw game last week is the sign that Georgia might have turned the corner. And in the first 3 quarters of this game, there's no coach that would look at the success that Georgia's having on the ground and do anything different. I would suggest you'd be a fool to do otherwise.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd be a fool to do otherwise, because I think you've got a really special quarterback. I mean, he did something that hasn't been done in 7 years, and I think I would agree with a lot of the Georgia fans that say he's the most talented quarterback you've had since Matthew Stafford. Now, you're right. You can't win next year's championship in the second half of this game. But what you can do is you can give JT some game reps and some confidence with Darnell Washington and Arian Smith and more to Jermaine Edmondson. And you can give George Pickens more than 3 catches and Kearis Jackson. And you can take care of that receiver room so they get confidence and so that they're out there running full speed. They feel good about themselves. They don't feel like they're just something to take up space until Kirby's defense runs on the field, because like I said, it's just 2 different mentality. I agree with what you're saying, by the way. I do think there's some irony that, they beat Mississippi State by 7 and everybody's doing backflips, but they're doing backflips because they saw the pass game here at Georgia. I mean, suddenly it was 2020 and it wasn't 1982 anymore with the run game and Ray Goff calling the plays, right? I mean, you got to see a Georgia offense that was explosive and JT Daniels pushing the ball downfield and 4 touchdown passes and 400 yards. And suddenly you felt like you belonged sitting at the grown-ups table with Alabama and Clemson and LSU and all the other teams that throw the ball regularly for 300 and 400 yards. Tonight, the only reason it feels like a setback to me is because of those style points. And you and I were joking before the show, and folks, you don't know this, but this is like a complete role reversal for me and BA. Last year, I'm like, no, he's got a great defense. It doesn't matter that Jake's only thrown it 15 times and BA's going, but he's got receivers open. So me and BA have done a 180 here, and it's ironic. I don't know if that's good or bad, Brandon, But I think I'm starting to feel a lot of what you've been feeling watching Jake Fromm. I feel like this was a step back for Kirby. Like, oh no, is he going to start thinking that 10 for 16 and 139 yards is how people want to watch football and what wins championships again?
It's our Dog Nation post-game show presented by the UGA Bookstore. Make sure you check them out online, UGAbookstore.com. Let's talk about a little bit about JT Daniels. Now, you made it clear that you didn't think Daniels got to throw it enough, but when he did throw it tonight, what was your evaluation of the way that he played?
He wasn't as sharp, I didn't think. He underthrew a couple of passes. I thought he was sacked holding the ball. I think one of the halftime adjustments, and I said this on the halftime show, BA, was he doesn't want to give up on plays. And I get that. That's a wonderful trait, but that's also how you get your head knocked off and you lose 12 and 15 and 20 yards on sacks. He took a couple of deep sacks. He's got to learn to get rid of the ball. Just throw it away. Give up on the play, punt it. Kirby feels good about his defense. He doesn't want you getting sacked. He doesn't want you losing 10, 12, 15 yards and putting yourself in negative down and distance. So I thought he held the ball. There were a couple of throws that were behind him, behind receivers. There was one that should have been picked. So the one that Kieres Jackson basically threw back into a defender and said, here, I don't want to catch it. So let's just say, that shouldn't count against JT, but he threw another one that should have been picked.
I totally agree with you on that. I totally agree. I thought the exact same thing, that the Jackson, the ball off Jackson wasn't really his fault. I don't know that it was Kieres' fault either. It almost just seemed like a bad break. South Carolina's probably lucky to fall on that ball, but I certainly don't blame JT Daniels for that interception. Then, as you said, a few plays later, there was certainly, as the stat guys will call it, an interception-worthy throw. So you kind of take the good, you take the bad. Mike, the one thing I think you and I are going to agree on tonight is this season is going to end in a few weeks. And I think a lot of us, myself included, are going to be pretty frustrated because I think one of the things you saw tonight from JT is this a guy that's still shaking off a little bit of rust? Obviously dominant last week in the win against Mississippi State, really feasted on everything that the Bulldogs gave him a chance to last week. Maybe tonight showing a little bit more of that rust, plenty of talent. He made some really nice throws tonight, really put a couple BBs in a nice spot a couple times, not including the last touchdown to Arian Smith that he threw. But, for the most part, there was just a little bit of rust that needed to be shaken off. So when this season's finally done in a few weeks, you're going to be like, I think a lot of us are going to be saying, wow, what would it be like to give JT Daniels 2 or 3 more games here this year, 2 or 3 more opportunities to get a little bit more into midseason form, continue to develop that chemistry with those receivers. And I think there's some of that that's really nicely coming along. Pickens and Burton, I would add to that. But it's going to be a scenario in which, boy, the season's going to end before some of us are ready for it to, because from an entertainment standpoint and from a player development standpoint, you're just going to want to see some more from JT Daniels. And unfortunately, Georgia, for whatever reason, and I don't know that we have enough airtime to even get into all the reasons why, but for whatever reason, Georgia just wasn't able to go to Daniels until last week. And so therefore, we're going to run out of football before we get tired of watching JT Daniels this season, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think you're right. And even just talking to our producer, Michael Carvel, I said, where do you think Georgia fans are at? And he said, I just want to see JT Daniels throw the ball. And I think that's why a lot of Georgia fans are tuned in, like, how good could this guy be? Here's something else to think about. JT Daniels may or may not have a decision, BA, whether or not he returns for his senior year. But 10 is 16 and 130 yards, and you mentioned the rust. He's not going to get any less rusty by not throwing passes. Again, I think this is a mentality. I think this is a bigger picture question. And I'm sure Connor Riley and the other Georgia beat writers are going to be asking Kirby about his decision not to throw the ball in the fourth. Is it a sign of Kirby going back to the old mentality, or is it Kirby Smart not wanting to run the score up on his friend? Or is it Kirby Smart really feeling like giving Dejon Edwards 14 carries was a valuable way to spend the fourth quarter?
So Mark Morris, one of our good commenters on YouTube, giving me a little bit of grief. He says, BA, you're changing your tune. Should we be developing the passing game or run it 80% of the time? Which is it? I guess my point on this is I thought tonight was a good night for UGA. I really did. And, to the extent there was some balance, I saw some balance tonight. I saw Daniels get a chance to throw it a little bit. I mentioned the Arian Smith touchdown there. I also saw a Georgia running game that was gashing people tonight. This wasn't 3 yards in a cloud of dust. This was a Georgia running game that was gashing people. Now, to Mike's point and to what a lot of the commenters are saying, would you be able to use this exact same formula and beat an Alabama or a Florida? No, you obviously would not. You're going to have to throw more on those teams. But I don't know that means that you should have done something different than you did tonight. I thought tonight was a good night. It's late on a Saturday night. Williams-Brice Stadium is one of my favorite stadiums to come to. I've left here very disappointed before. Georgia won a blowout game tonight. I really don't have a lot of complaints. There's a lot that Georgia still left to be worked on, but I think they would still have a lot to work on no matter what the final score was tonight and no matter how they achieved that. I don't have very many complaints now. I'm really in a pretty good mood.
Yeah, you know what? And I'm just sitting there thinking about it. If they scored 60 points, I think I would have said they needed 67. If JT threw for 300, I think I would have said 350. I just think that Georgia fans and Georgia football, you want the players to be excited. You want them to have that swagger. I mean, Georgia went from being a team in 2017 that was absolutely feared to 2018 that was still really good to 2019 that somehow held on by their fingernails to a top 5 rankings and a New Year's Six bowl win to now they're playing in consolation games. So nobody likes not being in the spotlight. Nobody likes it when people go, who's Georgia playing? I don't know. Who cares? Nobody wants Georgia to be there. People want people to say, wow, did you see what Georgia did? And when JT Daniels threw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, and you and I both talked to Chris Doring, I saw Doring sitting in that post game, that Florida Gator. He was white as a ghost. He knew that his Gators had dodged a bullet by not facing Jay. He's looking around there thinking to himself, holy cow, good thing this kid didn't come out 1 week early. And Georgia had the nation's attention. So this win, to your point, this is a quality win. Kirby felt really good about it. It was clear. They were talking to him after the game on the SEC network. Coach, tell us about your quarterback. They were excited. Well, he did this and this and this. But the real story is the running game, Kirby tells them. And they're like, yeah, coach. Like, yeah, Kirby, you're not getting it. Nobody wants to talk about Zamir White. JT Daniels is the guy that's got everyone's attention right now, and you gave him 16 passes and 139 yards.
Frank Patterson says he thought this was a great night for UGA. I'm sure there's a pretty nice celebration in that locker room to the extent that you can have one, this late in the year when you're not going to achieve your end-of-season goals. But you said something else a moment ago that I want to go back to, Mike. You compared this to previous years. This was not 2019 Georgia tonight. 2019 Georgia was 3-4 yards at a time at most and really unable to throw the football. This kind of reminded me of the best of what Georgia did in 2018. Think about the Kentucky game when Georgia ran wild against a very good defense up there in Lexington and clinched the SEC East. This South Carolina team's nowhere near that good. No one's going to pretend they are. But the blueprint tonight, big, gashing, gaping holes, and taking advantage of the running game, adding the throw game to go along with that. This really felt like, to me, what this team looked like when it was averaging 35 points in SEC play back in 2018 against the 9 opponents they played in the league that year. Really doing it with some throwing and a lot of running it. This was, to me, a little bit of a callback to 2018. And as much as I do think that Georgia's got to throw with the best if they want to beat the best, honestly, reminding you a little bit more of the 2018 offense, I would say that's not a bad thing given where Georgia has been for a lot of the last, say, season and a half.
It reminded me of 1981 because they ran it 40. They ran it 46 times and they threw it 16. And BA, you've got the most awesome background. You're like in the Twilight Zone. I'm waiting for the 1982 version of Herschel Walker to step out of the shadows and say, and you're going to go back in time to when Herschel played the Gamecocks in 82 and Ray Goff was on the other team. I mean, honestly, they threw it 16 times and ran it 46. I just, it's mind boggling. It's like, okay, Kirby, we get it. You've got a good run game, but where's your offense going and what's going to serve you best? So next week, and I'll just ask you this. I mean, BA, if someone said to you, hey, do you want to watch the Georgia game tonight? I have the playbook right here, and they're going to call runs 3 out of 4 plays. I mean, would that excite you?
I was very entertained by this. I was very entertained. The kinds of runs that Georgia was running tonight, yeah, I love to watch that. I love seeing Cook do what he did. I love seeing Zamir do what he did. These were big runs. And by the way, there was also some creativity in the way that Todd Monken was dialing this up tonight. You saw 2 back sets at least once with both McIntosh and I believe it was Cook on the field together. At one point in time, Georgia used fullback in a non-goal line situation, which was a little bit of extra creativity. So this was not, old man football, draw up a running play in a dirt. There was a little bit of creativity that goes into this. And as I said before, I was really pretty entertained by what I saw for the most part. And unequivocally, is that the right way to say it? Unequivocally, maybe that's the word. Unequivocally, I can say this was a great night for Georgia. Can you join me in saying that?
Well, not great. I'm going to say good, because on the flip side, and I don't know if I don't know if I'm supposed to wait for you to take us here or not, but defensively, I mean, this Luke Doty kid's hey, if I'm watching this game objectively, the South Carolina quarterback looked better than the Georgia quarterback. Luke Doty, 18 of 22 for 190 yards, BA. I mean, Mike Bobo let his kid throw more than Kirby let Daniels throw. And I was impressed. So should I have been impressed with Luke Doty, or is it that I'm not as impressed with this Georgia defense? Because South Carolina had some success throwing the football, and there were some missed tackles tonight. I think we're seeing a lot of young guys. I saw Zion Logue out there. I saw more Channing Tindall out there. And gosh darn, Tyreek Stevenson, he's just a step late on every single play for like the whole season. I see number 7, he's like one step late, and then he looks at the sideline like he's waiting to get taken out. It's like, just get there a little bit earlier, and you'll be somebody, right? But this Georgia defense, we saw a little bit of the future. So I like that. I like that we saw a lot of younger guys, an influx of youth in there. I'll tell you what, the guy that I'm really getting excited about, that I'm personally looking forward to writing about more and watching more, is Lewis Cine. The way this guy comes up and tackles people, he's an animal. He blows you up one time, he collars you, he body slams you, but he never misses the tackle. And he puts shots on people. And thank goodness he was there tonight, because there was a lot of missed tackles on the defense, BA. And I guess I'd want to know, were you satisfied with the defense tonight?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm like you. There are individual names that are popping for me, and Cine is definitely one of those guys. I think that Cine is emerging from the pack. He's been a solid starter. And now when you look towards the future, you see someone that's more than a solid starter. You see kind of a plus player that other fans in the SEC will probably know his name. I mean, obviously, the one thing that's going to make Cine a huge fan favorite is he plays the game so violently. And obviously, people recognize the targeting call against Florida. That's not even what I'm talking about.
But that wasn't bad. I mean,
I totally agree. Totally agree. It's a bang football play. By the letter of the rule, it should have been called, but it's not a dirty play or anything like that. But it's not just that one moment for him. Every hit that he makes is designed to separate a guy from a football. I love watching the way that Lewis Cine plays. I think that he's one of those guys that leaps off the screen. The other one for me is Jalen Carter. Carter, I believe, had a blocked extra point tonight. He had a big pass pressure tonight. He started this evening. We're on a search. Mike, I talk about this on Dog Nation Daily all the time. Georgia's got to find its superstar players. It's got to find its household names, those guys that if you and I talked about Ohio State or Clemson or whoever, we'd name 2 or 3 guys at the top of our head. Georgia's got to create those guys off the top of people's heads that they know the same way we would know the very best players in certain teams. There's a defensive search going on to identify who those guys are. In future years, I think Jalen Carter is really thrusting himself into conversation to maybe be one of those guys. There are a lot of talented players in this Georgia front 7. Carter may be special eventually. I thought it was all over the place tonight. Saw him in run coverage, run stuffing opportunity as well. I think that Jalen Carter is also an individual name, Mike, that I'm really excited about.
Well, and I'm going to pay attention because you were the one that picked out Jordan Davis before anybody else on the Georgia beat. You said, that kid, Jordan Davis, could be special. I said, oh, come on, BA, this guy hasn't done anything. And he's evolved into one of the most dominant players in the Southeastern Conference. And I think if Jordan Davis plays against Florida, he's a difference maker. I'm not saying they win, but he's a difference maker. And if you throw Richard LeCount out, and it's hard to stop talking about that game, watching the way Kentucky controlled Florida in the first half, and now that we see what we saw last week, what they could be, I guess I'm just curious, and I don't want to hit the panic button, but I don't want this to be Jake Fromm all over again. David Pollack did a podcast earlier this week, and sometimes Pollack's off the rails, and sometimes I love him, but he's always David Pollack out loud at 110%. And he said, when JT Daniels was signed, he thought to himself, here comes another Jake Fromm. And then he said, oh my God, JT Daniels, I didn't expect what I saw. And, it's almost like you took the car, like I said, you took the Ferrari out for a drive. Kirby saw it could go 160, and now he's put it back on economy mode, and he's driving 35. It's like, dude, you've got a quarterback here that can transform your offense. And he was asked that question during the press conference. Coach, what did you think about JT Daniels' performance? How pivotal was it for the future of the offense? And Kirby said, well, the verdict's out on that as far as an offensive transformation. The only reason the verdict's out is because the head coach doesn't want that. Now, what he does want is what we saw tonight, 43 runs and 16 passes. And it's going to be up to George Pickens and JT Daniels and Jermaine Burton to convince the head coach, let us throw the ball. We'll be more efficient. We'll make those plays. Trust us in the pass game. We'll deliver for you. We can do that. They're going to have to win Kirby's trust because his comfort zone right now is handing the ball off.
Yeah, but I don't know there are that many teams that would have that different of a run-pass ratio than Georgia had tonight when on their way to an easy win. The one thing that makes Georgia different than some teams in the country is to build the 21-0 lead, there are some teams that would have had to throw it. If Florida's playing in South Carolina tonight, if they're going to get up 21-0, they would have had to have thrown to do that. As it turns out, Georgia didn't really have to throw to build that lead. And so, therefore, once they had the big lead, that's what the NFL is the same way. Who rushes the most? It's the teams that are coasting to easy victories. That's how you rack up rushing attempts in the NFL. You're on your way to a big, to a big win. I think to get lost in the overall play chart tonight of total number of passes, total number of runs, to me, it's to kind of miss the point that Georgia found its way to coast to an easy victory, and Georgia did what most teams do when they're on their way to coasting, to an easy victory.
And I agree. And for the last 3 years, every game that Georgia played, they were in contention for a playoff spot. So if the objective is just point A to point B and to win the game as cleanly as possible, I'm with you. But I'm of the mindset that Georgia and Kirby Smart need to win back some national respect. I'm of the mindset that they've lost their momentum. People are saying they're not a top 10 team. Recruiting's not going as good as it usually does. The Georgia brand was damaged this season, unfortunately, by 41-24 and 44-28. The defense was a complete bust when the national spotlight was shining on Kirby Smart. His coaching came up short in the two biggest games of the year. So that's why I'm of the mindset. And typically, I'm not a style points guy. Like I said, you sat next to me the last 3 years, and you know that I like that smash mouth. Hey, BA, I love it. They're just running clock. But I think right now for what Georgia's trying to do to keep themselves out in front of those recruits, to make sure that people understand that this is a program that's really not going away, and to understand that Kirby Smart is sincere when he talks about changing his mentality about the offense. Listen, Todd Monken 2 years ago set a record with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the most passing yards in the history of the franchise. And tonight he had a quarterback throw 16 times for 140 yards. If you got Todd Monken, all I'm saying is, if you got guys like this, you got to. What did JT Daniels say? You don't recruit Jermaine Burton and George Pickens unless you throw to them. That's what he said.
I would say, though, you want to compare Georgia to Alabama for a moment. Alabama scored 63 last week against Kentucky. Mike, unfortunately, and I say this as a Georgia partisan who wants the opposite to be true, but the difference between Georgia scoring 45 against South Carolina and Alabama scoring 63 against Kentucky is not a willingness on Alabama's part to get that done and a lack of will on the part of Georgia to get that done. I just don't think Georgia's quite there yet. I just don't think they are. And throwing more than you have to is a way for a game that was 28-10 to turn into 28-17 or something along those lines. And I say that as a person who wants to see this Georgia passing attack continue to evolve, but be really careful reading too much